esteemed colleagues, distinguished guests, friends of King's College London, wherever you are in the world, warm greetings and welcome to the Conference on Sexual Exploitation of Women and Children by Aid Workers. It's a pleasure to have this conference at last and to kickstart what has been a long-standing ambition of some of us in the formal space, at least. Why is this subject important? I think it should be very common knowledge by now that the problem of sexual exploitation and abuse is widespread. And in actual fact, I believe it should be elevated to a problem that is a global challenge of equal standing to the conversations we're having around inequalities as a whole, around poverty, around, if you like, global terror and the environment. There is no country that is free from this challenge, but we know that it is more endemic in parts of the world where particular power dynamics make it impossible to create equal life chances for children and in particular for girls and women. I have seen firsthand how the abuse of girls moves seamlessly between the private space and the public space. But when those whom we trust the most, upon whom we depend and have all expectation of protection from egregious abuse, are the very people that perpetrate that abuse, we cannot seek to create the fair and just world that we promise. So whether we're talking about the field of peacekeeping or the field of humanitarian aid or development aid, all the workers across this area, we need to carefully investigate what has happened in the world. And it's been happening for some time. Every conflict-affected society has experienced external intervention, at least those that have experienced external intervention, I should say, in the form of humanitarian aid or peacekeeping, whether through the United Nations or other organizational actors. Every such society bears the scars of sexual exploitation and abuse, often by those who came to help. Children born of such abuse are left behind without a trace of their fathers who long vacated the scene. Now, thanks to science, we have the possibility of tracing paternity, if only to give those children born of abuse the possibility of the knowledge of their fathers. It's an issue that haunts many children left behind by those humanitarian and aid workers who have gone without a backward glance. King's College London has made this subject a focus of its research through the King's Together Fund, which has enabled a pilot DNA study to develop a proof of concept. A little bit about King's Together, just a statement about King's Together for those who are not familiar with this at King's. It's a seed funding scheme offering £1 million per year to support the development of multi- and interdisciplinary projects that address our strategic research themes. So as you can already guess, this is one of our strategic research themes this year. This work has the potential to make a difference and to provide a new framework for tackling sexual exploitation and abuse by those that international organizations send abroad, whether you're talking about aid agencies, humanitarian agencies, United Nations across the world, those that they send abroad to do good. Today's conference is an introduction to the research, the very science that makes this possible. As you will have already seen in the information we sent out, the conference aims to disseminate our work on sexual exploitation and abuse in the aid industry and to energize the field to chart a path forward for further systematic investigation into this topic. Broadly, the conference is split into three parts, as you will have seen on the program. The first part is an exploration of the scale and underreported nature of sexual exploitation and abuse by civilian aid workers. The second part looks at the potential of DNA testing to secure justice for victims. The third part looks at the institutional reform needed to make real progress on tackling this challenge. The conference will end with an open roundtable to discuss and explore next steps. And we encourage really all attendees to participate, because at this stage of the conference, we will have laid the ground for what we really need to do to take action as researchers and those that advocate for change in this area. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote address by Gillard. Gillard was the 27th Prime Minister of Australia. She's currently the inaugural chair of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London, which pleases me a great deal because it's been a wonderful opportunity to collaborate with Julia. And the Global Institute for Women's Leadership, through research, practice, and advocacy, is addressing women's underrepresentation in leadership. Julia is also the co-author of Women and Leadership with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, which analyzes the influence of gender on women's access to positions of leadership, the perception of women as leaders, the trajectory of their leadership, and the circumstances in which that leadership comes to an end. Julia Gillard currently serves as the chair of Beyond Blue, one of Australia's leading mental health awareness bodies, and at this moment, she's chair of the global funding body for education in developing countries, the Global Partnerships for Education. Julia commenced as chair of the independent global charitable foundation, Wellcome Trust, in April 2021. It gives me so much pleasure to welcome you to the stage to give your keynote, Julia. Have a good conference, everyone. Thank you.
I feel very honoured to be opening this symposium today. While exploitation in the aid sector is a difficult topic to speak about, it is a critical one, and one all of us in the development or aid sector need to confront with openness and determination. I would like to congratulate the organisers of the conference for their determination in ensuring we confront this issue head on, and in doing so, we are informed by the best of academic research. This event brings together the kind of advocates and experts needed to develop and implement the structural and legal reforms required as we strive to increase both individual accountability and organisational accountability. Thank you also to Andrew McLeod for inviting me to speak with you today. I have long admired Andrew's academic and international work, and particularly his work with child protection organisation Hear Their Cries. I believe Andrew will speak about their innovative work on DNA identification later today. The aid sector sits within a rapidly changing global landscape. Now more than ever, we understand that our global challenges no longer lie solely within country or state borders. A migrating workforce, climate change, health, these are regional or global challenges that require regional or global responses. We are living through a global pandemic that cannot be dealt with by going it alone. We also see the growing power of companies and organisations, global giants, exerting social, economic and political influence around the world. That means that addressing global challenges must involve non-state actors as well as governments. Although it has significantly changed the way we do global politics, there is no doubt there are some benefits to the increasing role non-state actors play on the world stage. They might have influence that individual countries simply don't. The reach and scale of what they do globally might be far more than that of one state. They might have expertise or resources that countries, particularly small countries, do not have or cannot expend in meeting certain challenges. They have the speed and capacity to implement global change quickly. Put simply, good non-state actors get stuff done. Global non-state actors, unencumbered by diplomacy or the trappings of government, can innovate and coordinate. But global non-state actors must be accountable, whether they are a global corporate giant or an on-the-ground charity. Many of you today will be familiar with the magnitude of the issue of exploitation in the aid industry. While public attention on this magnitude in recent years has heightened, these problems are not in fact new. For at least the last 2 decades, institutions have been aware of sexual abuse and exploitation by aid workers. In March 2017, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres confirmed that UN peacekeepers and civilian staff perpetrated 145 cases of sexual exploitation and abuse, impacting on 311 victims. Some things to note about these figures. They are the figures for 2016 alone. Many of the victims are children. Figures are only the reported crimes, mainly of field peacekeeping missions. These figures do not include development and humanitarian settings, nor implementing agencies, contractors, or partner organisations. As a result, the UN recognises that these numbers are likely to be the tip of the iceberg. Since 2003, the UN has accounted for just over 2,000 allegations. In 2018, when the UK Parliament's International Development Committee condemned the aid industry for sexual abuse, including child abuse in the developing world, it noted that it is impossible to come up with an accurate count of victims due to poor or non-existent source data. Hear Their Cries at one stage put out an estimate closer to 60,000 victims in the last decade. Women and girls are most vulnerable to exploitation, particularly orphans, children in child-headed households, and in some cases, widows or divorcees. In allegations against UN staff, related personnel and implementing partners between 2017 and 2020, women accounted for 80% of the victims. However, in 14% of the allegations, the gender of the victim is not known. Getting more precise data is important, but at a moral level, one victim is one victim too many. While we must address poor data and underreporting, our profound challenge is to address the power imbalances that lead to both exploitation and victims believing they must suffer in silence. At this point, I want to frankly acknowledge I am not an expert in this field, and my advocacy experience on this topic is minor compared with so many at this event. You will hear from academics, experts, and seasoned advocates later today. I have a different perspective to impart. When I was Prime Minister of Australia, our nation confronted its own dark history of systemic institutional abuse. I believe lessons learned from that process and the response to the Royal Commission may provide some insight into next steps for a comprehensive response to exploitation in the aid sector. And so I want to share them with you today. In consultation with my Labor colleagues, I determined to establish the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse in Australia in an atmosphere a bit like that surrounding sexual exploitation in the aid sector today. We didn't know the true scale of the problem, but we knew it was big. Survivors were showing incredible courage by publicly recounting what had happened to them. These individual stories not only included horrific tales of abuse, but also the details of a cruel aftermath, of being scared into silence, or telling people in authority but not being believed. So many survivors had sought justice, only to have door after door slammed in their face. We decided that we would never be able to get to grips with the scale of the problem and the potential solutions without a thorough, resourced, independent inquiry. A royal commission was seen as the right vehicle because of the status of such a body and its special powers, including the ability to compel witnesses to appear, to answer questions, and to produce documents. However, I don't want you to get the impression that instigating the Royal Commission was an easy decision to make. It wasn't. I wanted Australia to investigate and uncover the harm done to children behind closed doors and veils of secrecy. But I worried the impacts of a Royal Commission on victims, the length of time such an inquiry would take, what investigating could mean for those having to relive their trauma. I also worried about global examples where failings of an investigation worsened the grief of survivors. But I decided that not having a Royal Commission would be a further betrayal. People who have experienced so many barriers to telling their truth would once again experience the distress of dead ends. I also believe that the Commission would find new insights about how to protect our children in the future. We selected the Royal Commissioners with the greatest of care. We knew that those agreeing to take on a role of Commissioner would be immersing themselves in years of evidence filled with pain and distress, a task that can take a toll on even the most resilient. All those commissioners remained with the investigation from the beginning through to the final report. They did a tremendous job, often at significant personal cost. I also cannot emphasise enough the incredible courage it took for survivors to come forward and tell their own stories to the Commission. My nation owes them a debt of gratitude. One of the great successes of the Royal Commission is that people were able to go into private sessions and tell their stories in an environment where they would be treated with dignity and respect. Alongside private sessions, the Commission held public hearings and built a policy and research program to increase the understanding of the nature, cause, and impact of child sexual abuse, and look at ways to improve children's safety into the future. The Commission also established protocols in relation to criminal prosecutions or other legal processes on foot. On the 15th of December 2017, the Royal Commission presented a final report to the Governor-General detailing the culmination of a 5-year inquiry into institutional responses to child sexual abuse and related matters. By its final report, over 16,000 individuals had contacted the Commission and over 8,000 stories were heard in person. A number of matters uncovered were referred to the police for prosecution. 409 recommendations were made. These included avenues for redress, an apology, and recommendations for ensuring the future safety of children. From the information received through private sessions, public hearings, and policy and research, the Commission learned about the way institutions have responded to child sexual abuse. This helped to make recommendations focusing on preventing abuse, or at the very least, identifying it as early as possible, improving the way perpetrators are investigated, prosecuted, and sentenced, improving survivors' access to justice and ongoing support. The Royal Commission's key findings and recommendations highlighted the need to implement child-safe standards, that regulatory oversight and practice should be improved to facilitate the implementation of child-safe standards in institutions to ensure they create environments that are safe for children. The importance of believing children. the Royal Commission identified many barriers to children disclosing abuse, including being disbelieved or even punished as a result of a disclosure. The Royal Commission found that adults need to be educated in recognising and responding appropriately to behavioural signs or a disclosure of abuse. The Royal Commission found that a genuine apology from institutions responsible for past abuse was important for many survivors to achieve a sense of justice and recognition. The recommendations recognise that governments, institutions and the broader community share responsibility for keeping children safe. On the 22nd of October 2018, the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Scott Morrison, delivered a national apology to victims and survivors of institutional child sexual abuse at Parliament House, Canberra. The national apology was an incredibly significant day for survivors and their families, and I felt deeply privileged to share it with them. It was a chance to publicly recognise the prolonged suffering of so many and provide an overdue acknowledgement for those who had endured so much pain. I hope it remains an important milestone on the journey of healing and reflects a commitment for all of us to walk hand in hand with survivors. Australia is one of the only places in the world, or the few places in the world, to complete such a comprehensive government-led nationwide inquiry into institutional abuse. While the aid sector faces different challenges and on a vastly different scale, there are lessons that can be learned from Australia's experience and the subsequent recommendations. We know that power imbalances can lead to abuse and exploitation. This is particularly so where poverty or additional disadvantage intersect with structural imbalances. Power imbalances exacerbate barriers to reporting. The global community may also need to consider the role of anecdotal evidence. Our experience from the Royal Commission demonstrates the value of using anecdotal evidence as well as formal reporting to inform responses. To facilitate reporting, there needs to be safe, transparent, and accessible avenues for victims to share their experiences, knowing they will be treated with respect. Alongside a comprehensive global response, many organisations in the field are implementing their own safeguards, and we need to see both. I chair the Global Partnership for Education, the largest global fund solely dedicated to transforming school education in lower income countries, and a unique multi-stakeholder partnership. We work to deliver education so that every girl and boy can have hope, opportunity and agency. For nearly 2 decades, the Global Partnership for Education has been delivering funds and supporting solutions to build strong and resilient education systems so that more children in lower income countries, especially girls, get the education they need to contribute to building a more prosperous and sustainable world. We bring together lower income countries, donors, international organisations, civil society, including youth and teacher organisations, the private sector and private foundations to transform education systems so that all boys and girls, especially those who are marginalised by poverty, displacement or disability, can get a quality education. Our work has taken on an unprecedented urgency during the COVID-19 pandemic. Around the world, we are trying to keep children healthy while protecting their right to education. But the pandemic has hit the most at-risk children hardest and laid bare worsening inequality in the ways children are able to learn. Globally, the COVID-19 crisis has already claimed a staggering 3 million lives, and the tragic toll continues to rise. School closures have been one part of the many measures adopted to contain the virus, And at their peak, over 1.6 billion students were cut off from education, half of them in lower income countries. As yet, we cannot fully grasp what this lost learning will mean for the long term, for hundreds of millions who are still missing out on school. But it is already clear that for the most vulnerable children, especially girls, these disruptions have a life-changing impact. Many of you here today in the aid or development sector will have similar pressures driving your work. The long-term effects of the pandemic are yet to be fully understood. As we grapple with what it means to work with partner countries during and after a global pandemic, we cannot let urgency be a shield for substandard practice on the ground. Essential to the operations of GPE is the responsibility to protect the set of GPE partners and advance human dignity. This responsibility is enshrined in our Code of Conduct and Charter. In late 2018, GPE confirmed its commitment to promote, implement, and where needed, reinforce efforts to ensure a culture of respect and high standards of ethical behaviour. GPE has committed to establishing and maintaining standards aimed at preventing sexual harassment, abuse, and exploitation and other forms of misconduct, with special attention to the needs of children. We have also committed to providing a safe and trusted environment for those affected by sexual harassment, abuse, and exploitation to step forward to report incidents and concerns with the assurance that they will be treated respectfully and consistently. I consider that providing this kind of safe environment is essential. Linked to this is the need to provide protection for those affected, as well as whistleblowers or witnesses, and to take appropriate measures against any form of retaliation. At GPE, we will maintain robust policy frameworks and clear institutional mechanisms that address how incidents and allegations will be handled should they arise, including internal escalation mechanisms and cooperation with relevant national authorities where appropriate. Transparency and clarity is central to developing safeguards and remaining accountable. Alongside formal structures and safeguards, we have committed to delivering effective training programs so the Secretariat and staff of GPE partners understand the requirements and standards of behaviour expected of them. This commitment is non-negotiable. We cannot be an organisation seeking to advance human dignity without measures in place to protect that very human dignity. But there is more to do. The challenge of exploitation is so large that we need all of us, global multilateral funds and empowered local community leaders, nation-state resources and agile philanthropy, researchers and activists, all playing our part in concert. Like most global problems, there needs to be a response at multiple scales. That is why this symposium is so welcome. It is one step toward bringing together the best evidence to combat the problem. Existing inequalities will likely increase as the world grapples with COVID-19. Long-term school closures threaten hard-won development gains and could expose the world's poorest children to increased risks. Evidence shows that girls who are excluded from school are more at risk of gender-based violence, early marriage, and other forms of sexual exploitation and abuse. Through research, investigation, and advocacy, the sector can determine the structural and legal reforms needed to increase both individual accountability and organisational accountability. This requires collaboration as a global community, sharing data and information and working together on solutions, coordinating how to direct research and funding, because we need the best available evidence behind our responses. Together, those in the sector can bridge the gap between research and quality evidence and on-the-ground solutions. Close collaborations amongst leaders in the field have always been important, but will be ever more so as the sector explores reforms. As you look for answers, I would caution you to always remember the individual voices of victims. They will need support and respect to tell their stories with dignity. And essentially, we must judge ourselves against the standards that they have the right to expect of us. I thank you so much for the opportunity to participate today. All the best for the rest of this event.